I'm suspending the rules for the introduction of Arne Duncan. And I'm asking someone who, having sat through several of the Education Committee hearings, really does the Lord's work over there. He's the mayor's floor leader. He's the chairman of the Education Committee, Alderman 40th Ward, Pat O'Connor. Pat?
He was afraid he wasn't going to be introduced.
I knew you'd have come to my rescue, Bert.
You'd have been late.
Arne, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure for me to be here today. Let me start by naming a few people. Ruth Love, Manford Bird Jr., Charles Almo, Richard Stevenson, R.G. Johnson, Paul Vallis, all former superintendents of the Chicago Public Schools, all with a very different approach, different priorities, different personalities, different size egos, all doing one of the most demanding and thankless jobs that public service has to offer, the day-to-day management of one of the largest urban school systems in the United States. Appointed, not elected, all at a time when the connection or nexus between city government and the Board of Ed was less clear. In the mid-90s, Mayor Daley asked for and received control and direct responsibility for the Chicago Public Schools from the General Assembly. His team at that time was Gary Chico and Paul Vallis, and they were sent over to the Board of Ed, his former chief of staff and his former budget director, to attack the problems at the Board of Education's on a broad front, addressing student achievement, capital infrastructure, uncovering waste and mismanagement, and for the first couple of years, able to point to all the evils as being the fault of their predecessors. Things that were immediately achievable were done, and billions of dollars were spent on new schools and additions and repairs and new buildings. And test scores did rise some. I've enjoyed working with, arguing with, being cursed at, and cursing all of the former superintendents. All of our interaction had the goal of trying to better a system that public monies pays for, but that is the most important expenditure public monies can make, that being the education of Chicago children. Arne's immediate successor, Paul Vallis, I worked with him as a budget director and when he was a superintendent. He was a numbers genius, greatly dedicated to the task, and a person who could design a program for any circumstance. We had more individual programs for individual children at the Board of Ed during Paul's reign than any previous time. When Arne became the superintendent, a lot of people thought that all of the low-hanging fruit had been picked, that Paul was getting out in time, and that it was going to be difficult to maintain any sense of achievement. And I will tell you one thing that kind of separates Arne Duncan from the others that I have worked with. In Paul's last year, we had a program at Krista McAuliffe's school. Paul was running late, and he came in during my remarks, and I said that the Chicago Public Schools were making great strides, but our PR far outstripped our accomplishments to that point. And it was not a knock, it was simply an acknowledgement that we in government needed to continue to be cheerleaders for the Board of Ed because the support that we had was fragile, and the results that we had were not as great as we would have liked, and we needed to keep the momentum going forward so we could continue to keep Chicago dedicated to public schools. When I got through, Paul was real upset because a lot of times, while Paul would admit that we needed more to do and we had farther to go, it was often the tagline to his speech and not the message. The distinction is that when Arne Duncan gets up and tells people how the public schools are doing, his message is we're doing great things, but we have a long way to go before we can be satisfied. Now maybe it's the fact that Arne ran a school, Maybe he didn't spend time in government before. I mean, we can pick up a lot of bad habits in Springfield and City Hall, and maybe Arnie just hasn't picked them up yet. But the fact of the matter is, Arnie is a person who sees what we've done, is proud of our accomplishments, but is the first one to say, and the last one to remind you on the way out the door, that the work continues, and it needs to be better, and it needs to get more and more emphasis, because it is the most important work we as a city can engage in, the education of future children, of our children for our future. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce the longest-serving general superintendent of any big city public school, Arne Duncan.
Thank you so much. Please sit down. Thank you so much, Alderman O'Connor, for that kind introduction. And just to take one second on that last comment, it is staggering. I've only been in this job 5.5 years, and it's staggering to think that in every big city, this position of superintendent, CEO, whatever you want to call it, is turned over. New York, LA, DC, Seattle, Atlanta, Boston, Denver, Pittsburgh, San Francisco, San Diego, go right down the line. And it's funny, as we as a country sort of talk about public education and what needs to improve, there's lots of focus on teacher quality, and there's lots of talk about what poor kids can and can't do, but somehow we really haven't tackled those political challenges of what's so unstable about the structure of this that I think leads to student failure, and what can we do as adults and leaders to do a better job of fixing that. And that structure is broken not just in major cities around the country, but in states as well. Again, I've been doing this 5.5 years, and we're currently on our 6th state superintendent here in Illinois just during those 5.5 years. And so I think we have to collectively have a greater focus on structure and on governance, and what are we doing as political leaders to really make sure that we have stability and can make programs work over time and really stay the course. My being able to do this for a little while, I get none of the credit for that. The credit goes first and foremost to the mayor for taking over the public schools and creating a sense of real stability and mission. His 11.5 years have been 2 superintendents, Paul Vallis, my predecessor, and myself. You have a board that makes tremendous sense. Rufus Williams is doing an extraordinary job as a new board president, Roxanne Ward. In many other places, the superintendent in my position spends half their time trying to sort of placate the egos of board members and can't focus on the work. That just doesn't happen here. You have board members who have no egos, who are passionately committed to children, enable all of us to focus on what's really important. And the mayor's really created that culture here, and you've seen other places now, New York and others, really trying to follow the mayor's lead. So he's really set the tone for the entire city. And then secondly, I want to thank my wife. I couldn't begin to do this work without her support. Karen, thank you so much. This work takes a lot of sacrifice on the personal life and on the family, and just really thanks so much for all your help. I really appreciate it. I wanted to begin by asking you to remember some of Chicago's proudest moments as a city. Rebuilding from the Great Fire, the 1893 World's Fair, the creation of the Burnham Plan and the preservation of the lakefront, the incredible age of modern architecture, the gorgeous Millennium Park, and the current hope that the 2016 Olympics will shine a world spotlight on our city. In the world of sports, we've had the '85 Bears, the Bulls during the Jordan years in the '90s, and the White Sox most recently in 2005. These are, and hopefully will be, high points in a gutsy city defined by a can-do spirit, a city that makes no small plans, a city that is always willing to tackle challenges head-on and able to shoulder any burden in support of our common welfare. From towering skyscrapers to tidy, close-knit neighborhoods, we're a city that embodies American ingenuity, diversity, hard work, and quality of life. There is little that is great about America that is not represented here in Chicago in terms of culture, commerce, medicine, finance, or any other important sector. We are, in every sense, the great American city. But then there's our public school system, serving over 400,000 children, most of them poor children of color, many from single-parent or immigrant homes. It's a system once derided 20 years ago as the worst in the nation, abandoned by middle-class families, ignored for decades by civic leadership. And what does it say about Chicago that something so important could be so neglected for so long? Was it a collapse in values, an absence in vision, or a societal breakdown? Was it institutional racism, that people didn't believe that poor minority children could learn? What would allow a great city like ours to turn its back on a school system and pretend it didn't matter, or just wish that it would magically heal itself without our determined direction? A lot has happened in Chicago in the last 20 years, but I would argue that none of it is more important than what has happened in public education. Particularly since 1995, the year the mayor took control of the Chicago public school system, there's a track record of progress and improvement that should give all of us reason for hope. I just want to take a minute to look at the data and to look at the record. On the elementary school side, 10 years ago, it's a staggering number. Almost half our students, 48%, were testing in the bottom quartile. Today, our entire student population has moved above national norms. Last year, 2/3 of our elementary school students met state standards for the first time ever, and a remarkable 97% of elementary schools showed improvement. Every year, and you'll see in the books you have there, we outpace the state in terms of improvement on almost every single measure, meaning that in a real way, we are starting to close that achievement gap. On the high school level, most high schools are improving, the dropout rate is declining, and more students are going to college each year. The number of students taking AP classes and, more importantly, passing them, getting a 3 or better and getting college credit has doubled in the last 5 years. Our ACT scores are improving at twice the rate of the state and 3 times the rate of the country. And across the board, attendance is at an all-time high, graduation rates are at all-time highs, and violence is no longer accepted and is hit at an all-time low. But despite this progress, as Alderman O'Connor pointed out, we know we have a heck of a long way to go. Overall, our Prairie State scores at the high school level are too low. Our NAEP scores, which ranks us against other places across the country, are still unacceptably low. Our dropout rate must get down to 0. We have a lot of hard work there. And most importantly, we have an achievement gap between white and Asian students and Latino and African American students, particularly amongst our boys, our males, that has to be closed dramatically. And we cannot rest until every student is successful. Over the last 5 years, our work is focused on 3 core strategies. And at the heart of that, the first one has been instructional excellence. It's probably the toughest one and probably the least sexy, but really all that matters is what happens between our teachers in 25,000 classrooms and their students. That's the heart of our work. If we can't transform that, nothing else we do matters. If we can do a good job there, we really give our students hope for the future. On the elementary side, we tried to add 500 reading specialists to schools with mandated 2 hours of reading and writing for every child, every grade, every school in the city. We've brought in the past 2 years a huge step in the right direction. For the first time, benchmark assessments 3 times a year in reading and math, so that teachers and parents and principals are getting real-time data about what students' strengths and weaknesses are, how they can improve, and not just getting a test over the summer that we're all held accountable for, but doesn't impact students' lives at all. We're also looking to dramatically streamline the curriculum. When we got here, at one count, we had 86 different math books being used at the elementary level, not just across the system, but within schools and sometimes within the same grade at the school. Our staff has done a great job of streamlining that and starting to focus on a couple world-class curricula that we can collectively support. The high school level, we're on a very, very ambitious program to transform what we're doing there as part of what we call our High School Transformation Initiative. And this idea, I wish we were smart enough to think of it, but we weren't. This idea really came from our students. We try and spend a lot of time listening to our students, talking to them, doing surveys, doing student summits. What they consistently told us is that our expectations weren't high enough for them. They were looking to be challenged more. And as we talked to our teachers were desperately looking for better professional development. And so what we've done is trying the core content areas, English, math, and science, gone out, created a limited menu of world-class options, and are trying to dramatically increase the rigor and the level of work, the competency in those core areas. We've started with 14 high schools this fall. We're going to grow slowly, add a grade each year going forward, and add 14 to 15 more high schools as we go forward, so at the end of the day, we'll have about 50 high schools in the high school transformation effort. So far, the results have been very, very promising. It's still early. We're seeing freshman attendance up. We're seeing teachers more engaged and feeling better supported, and there's a real sense of hope about what we can do going forward. The second core strategy is what we call most broadly our human capital initiative. And simply put, is trying to get the best people we can to manage our system, trying to get the best principals we can to run our schools, and try and get the best teachers in front of every single student. There's been a tremendous amount of work going on at every level of the organization. Jay asked our management team to stand up and our teachers and principals. I will tell you, one of the things I'm most proud of is the caliber and the commitment of people now working to improve education. He mentioned David Vitale. David committed to work with us for 2 or 3 years. It's been 4 years. We joke about $1. He actually doesn't get paid anything. You know, the dollar's an inflation of what he gets. And bringing in people of his caliber and others like that to really drive change, who have a heart for the system, again, no sense of ego, has made us dramatically better. There's a program that's funded by the Broad Foundation that tries to train people coming out of different walks of life from the corporate sector to go into urban school systems and help to transform what's going on. We've tried to make Chicago the Broad capital of the country. We're proud to report that we have 12 what are called Broad residents in Chicago, more than any other city. And so far, we've retained 100% of them. They haven't left to go to the places because they feel they're making a difference. We've also recruited 3 superintendents from other school districts to come and really be part of that management team as well. And it's just a great diversity of talent. We have not just business leaders, we have people from the religious community, from the university community, from nonprofits and social service sectors. I think once in a while we have culture clashes and a few battles, and they present some challenges, but at the end of the day, the caliber of the decisions we make, I think, are dramatically better because of that diversity of skills, because the management team truly reflects what Chicago needs to be. I think will make our decision making that much better going forward. Secondly, when we talk about human capital and trying to get the best and brightest, we have a huge focus on the principalship. It's a cliche, but it's absolutely true. There are no good schools without good principals. In fact, quite the opposite can be true. We've seen too often where a great principal builds a school up over 10 or 12 or 15 years. If you don't replace them with another superstar, 6 months later that school is back to ground zero. It's much easier to tear something down than it is to build it up. We recently recruited Gail Ward, who's here, the superstar principal from Walter Payton, to really come in and sort of drive our efforts to create world-class principals in every single school. It's a fascinating time to be working on this. There's some real challenges and some huge opportunities as well. We have a lot of principals retiring. We anticipate next fall hiring a minimum of 102 new principals here in Chicago. It's a huge, huge effort that's underway. We have some great pipelines of talent coming in. We want to get into the game of recruiting more nationally. We've had some wonderful principals come in, but just a handful of them from other places. We want to do much more of that going forward. And we want to do more of putting great principals where we need them most. For the first time ever, we put 5 of our superstar principals into our toughest inner city schools this year. We're going to pay them a premium based upon student results. And we want to do more of not just bringing great principals into the system, but bringing them to the schools and the communities that absolutely need the most help. And then finally, in terms of the Human Capital Initiative, and probably where we've made the most progress is on the teacher side. Ascension Juarez and his team are here from HR have done just an extraordinary job. We've gone from 4 years ago having 9,000 applicants to Chicago Public Schools to this fall we had over 20,000 applicants wanting to come teach in our system. We have about 10 applicants for every position. It wasn't just our largest pool of talent, it was our best. About a third of the teachers we hired had master's degrees. We've also pushed very, very hard on alternative certification. I think there are lots of great potential teachers out there who just didn't happen to major in education as an 18 or 19-year-old undergrad. And we hired about 1,700 teachers. Of that, over 350 came from alternative certified routes. These are literally former doctors and chemical engineers and lawyers and journalists, often who they're taking 60, 70, 80% pay cuts, walking away from easier jobs because they want to make a difference in our students' lives. And we want to continue to push that very, very hard. We still do have areas of critical need, math and science. We're starting to try and think about recruiting internationally, looking at some other countries to try and bring in this talent. The shortage here in Chicago is not a local one, it's a national one, and so we're trying to become much more creative in how we think about that. As teachers come here, we have to do a good job not just of getting them here, but of retaining them and building a career ladder which didn't exist before. Working in partnership with the Teachers Union and the Chicago Public Education Fund, we've put a huge emphasis on nationally board certified teachers. National board certification is the Cadillac version of professional development. It is extraordinarily rigorous. It is a national standard, so we either make it or we don't compared to the rest of the country. When Barbies and Watkins and I got here about 5 years ago, we had, I think, 19 nationally board certified teachers. Today, we're up to almost 500. Our goal for 2008 is to be at 1,200, and then by 2011 to be at 2,400. With about 600 schools, we'd love to have 4, 5, 6 nationally board certified teachers in every school, and we want to continue to push that very, very hard. And then this year we had a major, major breakthrough. We worked all year with a group of what we call our drive teachers. These are 23 of the best teachers in the system who were picked by their colleagues to serve as an advisory council with me, and they taught me a heck of a lot. They were extraordinarily smart. They were unbelievably inspiring. They really gave me a sense for what's working and what's not out there. As we went into the year last year, we talked about 8 or 9 different things we could work on, recognizing great teachers, better induction, working with parents, data. And what they really wanted to work on is how do we award great teachers? How do we do a better job of shining a spotlight on great teachers and getting them to teach in the communities where we need the most help? We did a lot of work, came up with great plans, but didn't have any money to do anything. And then in May of last year, the Department of Education federally came out with a $99 million grant called the Teacher Incentive Fund to fund exactly what we were talking about. We submitted an aggressive proposal, received $27.5 million from the federal government, the largest grant that Chicago Public Schools have ever received, and it's really due to the hard work of those teachers. Along with some matching funding from local foundations, it's created a pool of $40 million that will allow us to really financially reward great teachers to go into the schools and the communities that need the most help. Everyone in the schools would be eligible for this money. We will only go to schools where 75% of our teachers want this program. And the goal is really to support not just the teachers, but also the security guards and the lunchroom workers and the custodians and every adult in the building who touches a child. And where we see schools really taking off, where we see great progress, it's always an entire school that's doing a great, great job of moving those students. And all these ideas came from our Drive teachers. I think we have 2 of them here today. I see Juanita here and Jess Reyes as well. Thank you so much for your leadership. And then finally, on our teachers, we want to start, as we go into the new year, in January and February, we're going to try and bring in every single one of our teachers, all 25,000 of our teachers, to 6 Saturday sessions at the Symphony Center. We've done some great professional development with our principals and administrators at the start of each year. That's gone extraordinarily well, talking about the data, talking about what's working, what's not, how do we improve. We've never had the opportunity to do this with teachers. And we're going to start doing this by grade level, the elementary side, primary first, then intermediate, then upper, and then the high school side by content area, English, math, and science, lining up with the High School Transformation Initiative. And we're really hopeful that really getting them thinking about what's working, what's not, really focus on the data at their level and across the system, that will help us go to another level. Our third core strategy I call most broadly more learning opportunities. And it simply reflects the fact that the old model of schooling, 5 days a week, 6 hours a day, 9 months out of the year, really doesn't work for much of anyone. And so we tried to do a number of different things. We're trying to dramatically expand the number of children involved in early childhood programs, and Governor Blagojevich and his team have been very helpful in funding this. We have about 30,000 students in early childhood programs now. We hope that goes to 40,000 just a few years from today. We see as we look at our data, it's fascinating. Our 8th grade students are always at a much higher level than our 3rd grade students. And the reason is not because our 8th grade teachers are that much better than our 3rd grade teachers. It's because we're constantly playing catch up. We have too many students that come to us too far behind. It makes it very, very tough on those kindergarten and 1st grade and 2nd grade teachers to work with those students who know how to read, and those students that have never, frankly, seen the front of a book from the back of a book and can't tell the difference and don't have their socialization skills intact. And so the more we can get to our 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds and really give them an opportunity and get them into kindergarten ready to learn, the better we're going to do. Secondly, there's been a fascinating thing over the past 4 or 5 years in terms of expanding early childhood education. For the first time ever, we're charging middle-class families about $7,500 a year to send their children to Chicago Public Schools. And this would have been unimaginable 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. And my wife and I are actually part of this. Our daughter started in tuition-based pre-K this year. We were looking for a staff discount, couldn't find one. But we think it's been the best investment we can make. And there are literally hundreds and hundreds of families across the city now who are sending their children to neighborhood schools and receiving a great, great education and getting a sense for not just the magnet schools, again for the neighborhood schools. And it's been very interesting that about 75% of those families are keeping their children in those neighborhood schools, which is really starting to change the middle-class flight that we've seen historically. And so we want to continue to expand that significantly going forward. Another area in terms of more learning opportunities is what we call most broadly making our schools community centers. And Beth Swanson sitting here in the back who's done an extraordinary job leading this effort. Again, the idea is to have schools not open 6 hours a day, but 12, 13, 14 hours a day with a wide variety of activities, not just for our children, but for their parents. For students, we want academic enrichment at the heart of what we do, but also drama and arts and sports and music and chess and debate and yearbook and all those things that give our students a reason to be excited about coming to school every day. And a cold winter, December, January day, want to make them get out of bed and go to school. We also want to have a wide variety of activities for parents. GD classes and ESL. And we now have a set of schools, over 100 schools, some of which have 100 to 150 parents coming to school every single day, not for their children's education, but for their own. I'm just absolutely convinced that where families are learning together and where schools truly become the hearts of the community, we have a chance to do something very, very special. And then finally, our third idea in terms of creating more learning opportunities is what we call most broadly the Renaissance 2010 initiative. And this is probably the toughest thing we do. It's one of the most controversial and difficult. I would argue it's absolutely one of the most important. David Pickens is here, who's done a great job on a very tough situation of helping us close schools that have failed children academically. And while closing schools is never fun, it's always tough, and we try and do it as thoughtfully and compassionately as we can, the flip side we think is infinitely better. Our goal is to create 100 great new schools here in Chicago in neighborhoods that have been underserved, a variety of different schools, charter schools, contract schools, performance schools. We have 37 schools now. We recently approved 17 with the board. And we have about 40,000 students involved in these schools now, about 10% of our population. These new schools, we've tried to put together what we think is a very powerful combination, increased autonomy. They have some real flexibility that other schools don't have. At the same time, increased accountability. Every single school has a 5-year performance contract. We evaluate them every single year. If they're not doing well, we'll close them. We've closed a couple of those schools. We think those two things together are very, very powerful. We've seen this explosion of innovative curriculum. We have our first single-sex schools. We have voc ed schools, a manufacturing school opening in the old Austin High School, which we're very excited about. Military academies, virtual schools. For the first time ever this year, we have a group of our best teachers, our Golden Apple teachers, who came together to create a great new school. They'll be opening next fall. We're starting to replicate some of the successful models. We've had some great charters that have been in existence here for 7, 8, 9 years. We really challenge them to think about not just running one school, but run a small network of schools, 3, 5, 7, 8, whatever it might be. We have a whole set of players, the Academy for Urban School Leadership, the University of Chicago, Perspectives, North Lawndale College Prep, also Noble Street. Mike Milkey's here. Where's Mike? Mike, please stand up, Mike. You've done an extraordinary job. Mike Milkey and his wife and a small team are running the unbelievable high schools, the Noble Street Network, and we hope they continue to create great new schools for us. Fourth, another benefit of the Renaissance 2010 initiative, and this is one that is invaluable and that somehow the press and others haven't really picked up on how critically important it is what it's enabled us to do is to bring great talent to neighborhoods where that talent has traditionally fled. And too often, not always, but our best talent has gone to easier schools and moved out to other districts. And for the first time ever, we're reversing that trend and bringing the best of the best into those neighborhoods and those communities and those schools that need the most help. And just to give you one concrete example, Englewood. Everyone here is familiar with the challenges in Englewood and how far we have to go and how poorly, frankly, we've served children there for decades. Just this past year, this fall, we opened 4 great new schools in Englewood. Our first all-boys school, Urban Prep, opened, led by Tim King. Second, Providence St. Mel, led by Paul Adams, who's a legendary educator on the west side, opened our first public school at the old Bunch School that we closed down. Third, we have a remarkable team that took over Sherman Elementary. We moved all the adults out for the first time ever, kept the children there, brought a whole new team of adults, led by Mike Kolite's group, the Academy of Urban School Leadership. We have a fantastic young principal, Lionel Allen, leading that effort. And then one of our turnaround schools I talked about earlier, Earl. One of our best principals, Adrian Willis, walked away from Keller Gifted Center, left there to go take over Earl and turn that around. So just in 1 year, you have 4 great new options. It happens to be 4 African-American male, extraordinarily strong leaders running those schools. And it makes me very, very hopeful about what we can do in other places as well. Renaissance 2010 has also helped to bring together what I think the best of Chicago is and can be. When we announced, did the press announcement for the 17 new schools you're opening, it was amazing to look at the room. You had great, great educators. You had some of our business leaders from town. You had great people from the university community. We had our religious leaders. You had nonprofits. And probably most significantly, you had parents and grandparents all there together with this real passion for creating great new schools. And those kinds of mixes of people, I think, happen too infrequently, too seldom in our society and our culture. And this movement behind great new schools has really brought that together. And I always say, while I think these new schools are great, if people weren't interested in them, if there wasn't a demand, we'd stop opening them. But when you look at the numbers, it's fascinating. Every single school we've opened, every single new school has opened with a waiting list. And I think a lot of our job is to listen to children, to listen to parents, and find out what they want. And the day they stop requesting new schools is the day we'll stop doing it. But as long as there's a demand there, as long as you have parents and students desperately looking for better options for their children, we have an obligation to continue to drive that. If you look at the results, it's pretty fascinating. The first schools we closed a couple years ago were Dodge and Williams, very tough decisions. We closed the schools, moved the children to another school for a year, took a year to plan and think and work with the community, and then brought them back to those buildings. Those same children, same families, same socioeconomic challenges, same building, same neighborhood, those same children, after 2 years of testing, are performing 2 to 3 times better than what they were doing before. Not 2 or 3%, 2 or 3 times better. So it puts the absolute lie in any myth that poor children can't learn. It tells you a lot about what high expectations mean, what passion means, what it means to have great educators in front of our students, and we want to continue to drive that. Finally, on Renaissance 2010, I just want to thank the mayor, I want to thank the business community, I want to thank our board, and I want to thank, probably most importantly, our parents and our grandparents for having the courage to take this kind of thing on. Change is hard. Not too many other school districts in the country are closing schools for academic failure and trying to create something better. But when you see the results, when you see that spark of joy, when you see what's going on in our children's lives, it lets you know that we're onto something very, very important. Those 3 core strategies are always going to be at the heart of our work. We think if we can execute on those, doing a great job in the instructional side of both the elementary and the high school side, trying to get the best and brightest to come into every level of the organization through our human capital initiative, and creating more learning opportunities for our students. We think if we can get better at those as we go forward, we truly can become a world-class school system. And to strengthen the 3 core strategies and better measure our ability to execute them, in the last 4 years, we've been lucky enough to add people like Dave Vitale and Bob Runcie and Larry Stanton and Pedro Martinez to the team, who brought with them business backgrounds. And with their leadership, we've begun to establish a culture of performance-based management. We're using data more intensively to help drive decisions. In the past 2 years, we've done a couple of really interesting things. At both the elementary and the high school level, we've created scorecards. And why have we done this? We think, and it's absolutely right, there's always been a critique that you measure us by just one test score. And there's so much beyond a test score that tells you the story of whether school is working or whether it's not. So just to give you a couple examples, at the high school level, we're measuring all kinds of things. Yes, we continue to measure test scores, but we look at AP pass rates. We look at the number of students taking AP. People know that if you want to increase test scores, one way to do that is to force more of your low-performing students out of school. And you've seen those perverse incentives happen in other places. So we measure not just test scores, we measure dropout rates. And probably even more importantly, we measure a very interesting statistic, the percent of freshmen on track for graduation. And lots of research say that freshmen who are on track to graduate are 5 times more likely to get there. And so if you're trying to prevent dropouts at the junior and senior year, it's too late. You've lost those children to the streets already. So if we can focus all our schools on keeping those freshmen on track, we think that that dropout rate will go down dramatically. And it's fascinating to look at our best high schools. Those high schools where the test scores are going up, guess what? Dropout rates are going down as well. It's not either or, it's both and what you're seeing is just more rigor, more engagement, more adults that care about our students. So we're trying to have a much more comprehensive picture in terms of what's working and what's not for our students. We're trying to be absolutely transparent with data. We're going to publish this annually, the good, the bad, the ugly. We're going to let everyone know what's working and what's not. And we're encouraging every school to compete against themselves, not against other people necessarily, but compete against themselves. And we think every school can get a little bit better each year. If that happens, the cumulative effect will be very, very powerful. We're doing the same on the elementary side, and for the first time ever, we're surveying our students. And this is one of my regrets. We should have done this 5 years ago. But it's amazing here in Chicago, we've never asked our students what's working and what's not. And so for the first time, we're surveying all of our high school students and asking them, do you feel safe in school? Do you feel there's an adult in that school who can help you if you have a problem? Do you feel that adults have high expectations for you? Are you being pushed? Are you being prepared for your post-graduation plans, be it college or going into the world of work? And it's fascinating the data that we're getting back, and we're going to hold ourselves accountable at both the high school and the elementary level, not just to listen, but to really act upon what our students are telling us. We also survey our principals, and I always say that all of our jobs at central office are first and foremost to really support our principals. And we ask them anonymously to tell us what's working and what's not. It just so happens that HR has done a great job and got great ratings. This past year, Barbara Easton-Watkins, the Chief Education Office, got a higher rating in terms of improvement than my office. So we got a little healthy competition going to see if we can improve there. And we're just convinced that we can better support our principals. They're going to do a much better job. We're tracking for the first time ever teacher attendance. And this one's sometimes a little controversial, a little hard, but this came from talking to parents. And the first thing most parents want to know, which is pretty common sense, is my teacher in school in front of my child? And it was fascinating, again, as you really dug into the data. You have 2 schools, same neighborhood, 2 or 3 blocks from each other, same issues, where the teacher attendance rate for the year had a swing as much as 10%. Now, 10% may not seem like a lot. We have 180 school days in the year. 10% is 18 days. That's a month of school. And so if one school down the block that has teachers there a month more on average across the board than the other one, we got to look at it. And it's not about blaming teachers at all. Quite frankly, where teachers aren't showing up, we really look at the culture. What's the principal doing to create a culture where teachers want to be there or not be there? And so we're continuing to try and look at all these data points and each year get better at what's working and what's not. We're also creating a new incentive program for employees at every level of the organization. We're trying to free our high-performing schools, what we call our AMP schools, move them out from the bureaucracy and give those principals as much freedom as they can have to really drive change at that local school level. And we think these principals are feeling more empowered than ever before. We have about 90 schools in the AMPS program now. We're going to add about another 20 this year because we have such great results. And if things continue to go well, if we continue to improve, we can anticipate as much as a third of our schools in that AMPS program in the years ahead. For the first time ever, we're offering our AIOs, our area instructional officers, bonuses based upon driving student improvement at their local school level. And our area instructional officers are basically mini superintendents. They have 20 to 40 schools each. At the elementary level, we're seeing this 20-point jump in terms of student achievement over the past 4 or 5 years. Our best AIO, her schools have improved by 25%. She's moved a quarter of her kids above state standards in the past 4 years. Where we see that kind of progress, we really want to reward our AIOs for their hard work. We're trying to take this a step further and reward winning streaks. So if an AIO can put together not just one good year, but 3 great years in a row, they can make as much as $20,000 more in that 3rd year than they make today. And while money doesn't begin to motivate them, that's not why they do the job. We think it's important to recognize that. We've tried to eliminate automatic raises at the central office. All of our work for the first time ever will be tied to performance and how students are doing. For the first time ever, we talked about the Teacher Incentive Fund grant. We're going to start to reward teachers differentially based upon their skills, based upon the schools they're working on, and how students are doing. And we want to do more on the principal side. To me, that's the next frontier. How do we do a better job of rewarding great principals who are making a difference in students' lives? As I said earlier, for the first time ever, we're moving some of our best and brightest principals into some of our toughest communities. We're just really in our infancy. We have a lot to learn there and want to continue to get better there. We've tried to work so hard, and I think we've come so far over this past decade. And I'm absolutely convinced that we're much smarter today than we were 4 or 5 years ago. We're trying to build a culture that embraces innovation, that embraces choice and competition. We're trying to get away from a one-size-fits-all mentality, whether it's for students or teachers or for schools. We have better partnerships than ever before with universities. We have 3 universities recently, the University of Chicago, Roosevelt, and IIT. They're announcing full scholarships, dozens of full scholarships to Chicago public school students, many targeted for our 85% of our students who live below the poverty line. So they have real hope and a real sense of hope for the future. And I think that sense of hope is growing in neighborhoods across Chicago. One fascinating book I just finished reading, I recommend it to all of you, is Taylor Branch's biography of Martin Luther King. It talks about his last 3 years of his life. And it's amazing. 40 years ago this year, in 1966, Martin Luther King came to Chicago to live in the heart of the West Side, North Lawndale, to really try and shine a spotlight on slum conditions and poverty. And it's amazing as you look at the history. Since that time, past 3 or 4 decades, I think there have been billions of dollars invested in North Lawndale. Jobs programs and anti-poverty programs and all kinds of federal money. But it's amazing, if you look at our students and look at our schools, they're still absolutely desperately poor. And you have to ask yourself why. And I'm convinced that the only thing that didn't change was the one thing that has the power to change everything, and that's the quality of public education. Quality education is the only way, I think, to end cycles of poverty and social failure. And today, we're convinced that that is changing dramatically in places like North Lawndale. Since 2001, we've opened or approved 9 new schools in Lawndale, several sharing buildings with existing schools, and 5 of these new schools and buildings we've closed for academic failure. There's a new sense of hope and opportunity that was missing for those children in that community for far too long. And as we strive to transform the educational opportunities in North Lawndale and other neighborhoods across the city, I want you to take a minute to think about where our school system could be 5 years from now. Fully 20% of our students, 75,000 students, could be in new schools 5 years from now. We hope every parent in every neighborhood will have 4 to 6 great options to choose from, again, trying to get away from one-size-fits-all mentality. We think great teachers will be competing to go into our toughest neighborhoods rather than to escape them, reversing that talent drain. We think every school will have nationally board certified teachers in them for the first time ever. And every school could be a community school, open these much longer hours, really serving not just the children, but the entire community. 5 years from now, we'll have a system that no longer has acceptable levels of failure. no longer views a 10% dropout rate as okay, no longer accepts high schools where only 1 in 10 students at grade level. And finally, we will have a system where every student has a real plan after graduation, either a job waiting or a seat in a college and university. And maybe when that day comes, just maybe, Chicago will be a city where people feel about the Chicago public schools the same way they feel about the '85 Bears and Michael Jordan's Bulls and Millennium Park. And honestly, I believe that joy will be even greater because we won't just be basking in the reflective glory of what 12 basketball players did or 50 football players did, but collectively, all of us will have transformed the life chances of our city's children. What could be better than that? Steadily and systematically, we have tried to mold the Chicago public schools into a more efficient, more accountable, and more innovative system. And because of that, we think we've earned the right to ask for more money from the state. I think everyone here knows the challenges with the state. Illinois currently ranks 49th out of 50 states in the amount of money going to public education. It's a dismal funding record. The 50th state is actually Nevada. They have gaming. They're 50th by design. We're 49th by default. We're actually dead last. Not only are we 49th there, we are 43rd in terms of the disparities between the wealthy school districts in Chicago and the poor school districts. And what you see is the children of the rich in the northern suburbs have literally 4 times as much money spent on them each year than the children of the poor in the south suburbs. There's something I think criminal about that. If you look not just across the state, we've gotten more sophisticated looking nationally. In New York, children in New York get $4,000 more spent on them each year than children in Chicago. With over 400,000 children here, that would be an additional $1.6 billion coming to Chicago. $1.6 billion. Can you imagine what we could do in terms of reducing class size and more after school, more summer school, those kinds of resources? In Boston, students get $2,000 more per head. That's $800 million. So not only do we have huge disparities within the state relative to the rest of the country, we're in a dismal situation. And again, we want our students competing not just against our own, against the suburbs, we want our students competing nationally and internationally. We want to give them every chance to do that, and right now the system just isn't set for it. I think it's now, and I think something has to change. This is the moment of truth for Illinois, and anyone who thinks we can manage our way out of the state's financial problems is wrong. We have reduced administrative costs to less than 5% of the overall budget. We have laid off administrators every single year, and we've had no across-the-board salary hikes for administrators. There's not a lot more room to cut. Now that the election is over and the recently completed veto session produced nothing, it's time for Springfield to get serious. If it doesn't happen this year, the first year of a new term, we don't think it will happen for another 4. Everyone, from the governor on down, needs to keep an open mind on the issue of funding reform. Business groups need to step up and support a real plan to change the tax system. We understand that tax reform will not come without education reform, so educators and unions need to come to the table in a spirit of cooperation and compromise, ready to put our common needs ahead of our individual agendas. There will be a strong push for district consolidation. There will be greater demand for accountability and for more charters, both of which we fully embrace. Collectively, we must seize the opportunity, not just to change the funding structure, but to take public education to the next level. 20 years after school reform and 11 years after Mayor Daley took control of our schools, Chicago is poised for greatness. I'm absolutely convinced that we can become the best urban school system in America. After so much progress and so much hard work, you can almost taste it. This year's test scores were a significant breakthrough, but the next 5 years will decide whether we can permanently topple some of our toughest challenges and our most enduring obstacles. The high schools that continue to struggle, the students who start behind and we never help them catch up enough, the subject areas like math and science where we don't currently have enough certified teachers. But no other city has the same opportunity as we do here in Chicago. We are so lucky to have the mayor's extraordinary leadership and courage, the civic commitment, the philanthropic support, the universities offering scholarships, the community support, the strong and growing tax base, and finally, the rising call for state funding reform. But let's remember that the real proof of our success is not that all these stars are finally aligned, and not that the educational, civic, business, political, and community leadership are more in sync than ever before. The ultimate proof of our progress is that this generation of children, more than the last one, and far more than the one before that, has a real sense of hope and possibility. They have matched our commitment with their own call for higher expectations. And because we have finally stopped giving up on our students, They have stopped giving up on themselves. I brought two of our students with me today. I'd ask them to stand for 1 minute while I conclude. Keith. I only make you stand for a minute. Hang in there. Keith Thornton is a senior prosser. I met him earlier this year on a visit to the school, and he blew me away with his commitment. He is in the ROTC program. He's a student council president, part of the local school council, and has a 3.7 GPA. All his life, he's wanted to be a fireman. He now attends the Chicago Police and Firefighter Academy. We require our students to do 40 hours of community service in order to graduate. And listen to this, Keith has completed almost 5,000 hours of community service. His motto is simple: you can do whatever you want in life. Next to him is Stephanie Matos. Stephanie is a senior at Schurz High School. She's class president, editor of the yearbook, and a member of the academic decathlon team. She works 20 hours a week at a clothing store to help her family, but also manages to take and be successful in 2 AP classes. She's also heading to college next fall and wants to be a lawyer. Like the vast majority of our students, Keith and Stephanie don't come from wealthy homes. They attend our neighborhood schools. They've had their share of challenges, but they overcame them because they want something more from life. They want everything all of us have: a home, a family, a decent job. They want to make a difference and to help us build a better world. When we're telling the full story of school reform here in Chicago, it shouldn't be about the politics, the test scores, money, Renaissance 2010, or all the other issues that make headlines. Instead, it should be about the literally thousands of students beating the odds every single day who the press never seems to notice. It should be about students like Keith and Stephanie, kids who prove that if you give them a chance, they can do anything and go anywhere and accomplish something important. Their promise is our promise. Their future is our future. And at the end of the day, their hopes and dreams represent Chicago's proudest and greatest achievement. Thank you so much.